know how pharaohs used to get buried with gold and treasure, right? Good. Now guess what else they were buried with? People. Yes, real, living people. Servants, guards, even wives. Strangled or poisoned so they could serve the king in the afterlife. And that wasn't rare. Some tombs had hundreds of human sacrifices, on purpose. And now this makes you think, what other creepy things were normal in ancient Egypt? Well, first of all, you'd think a tomb is just a place for the dead. But in Egypt, it was also a loaded weapon. You see, they buried their dead with treasure, and a warning to stay far, far away. In many ways, Egyptians treated tombs like sacred real estate. Mess with one, and you'd face divine retribution. Seriously, coffin lids were inscribed with warnings like, "He who disturbs this tomb shall have his heart eaten by a crocodile." It's more of a supernatural threat letter than an eviction notice, but archaeologists did manage to find plenty of scribbles on tomb doors that yell threats of death or eternal torment to trespassers. And they weren't kidding. Back in those days, if you were a state enemy, priests wrote your name on a clay doll. Then they stabbed it, smashed it, and burned it. Think voodoo, ancient Egyptian style. They believed this ritual zapped the curse right into you. And you know, these curses didn't just aim at robbers. They basically targeted anyone who'd anger the powers above. So if you stole from the dead, then expect the afterlife to strike back. And speaking of the afterlife, the journey there started with some seriously gruesome preparations. Mummification? Yeah, we've all heard about it and seen it in movies and documentaries. It was definitely brutal. You see, first, embalmers cut into the left side of the abdomen and pulled out every organ, except the heart. The heart stayed put because they thought it carried your smarts. Then came the brain. It gets pulled out through the nose using hooks, and sometimes the skull collapsed, which then messes up the poor face. The brain was tossed because apparently it was useless. Meanwhile, lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines went into canopic jars for safekeeping. And after the disembowelment party, the body got buried in natron salts for about 70 days. Think of it as a super dry salt bath. Then priests anointed the corpse with resins and wrapped it in dozens of linen bandages. Also the ka, or the person's spiritual twin, would live on intact. Now, to us today, it reads like a horror show. But to the ancient Egyptians, it was just routine care for the afterlife. And humans weren't the only ones getting the full burial treatment. They slaughtered and mummified animals by the millions. For instance, cats were temple-bred, embalmed, and then sacrificed for Bastet, the goddess of cats and fertility. Then there were the ibises, which were captured or hunted in droves for Thoth. A Smithsonian genetics study even found dog, cat, and crocodile farms set up just to feed this ritual frenzy. At Tebtunis, for instance, archaeologists uncovered dozens of crocodile mummies, adults with stacks of babies strapped to their backs. Yes, really. At the temple of Sobek, the crocodile god, priests treated crocs like VIP guests. They wrapped them and buried them in lavish ceremonies. As for cats and dogs, they often got gold collars or amulets in their tombs. To the ancient Egyptians, this was devotion. To us, it looks like industrial-scale animal cult slaughter. Meanwhile, their approach to healing the living was equally disturbing. You see, ancient Egyptian medicine was equal parts clever herb lore and straight-up voodoo. Their Eber's papyrus from around 1550 BC lists remedies that make you squirm. Got weepy eyes? Not a problem. Smear a paste of myrrh, onions, verdigris, henna, and antelope dung on your lids. Then paint it on with a vulture feather. Lovely, right? And if you're suffering from ingrown eyelashes, then not a problem either. They mixed a spell consisting of animal parts, fats. No one certain of the precise recipe, to be honest. But hey, they had a recipe for blindness, too. You simply grind up dried pig eyes with honey and red ochre. Then you pour it in your ear and recite, "The crocodile is weak and powerless." And here's a lovely ancient Egyptian headache solution for you. You strap a clay crocodile doll stuffed with herbs to your forehead, or you can melt beeswax around hot sticks on your head. And if you're in the market for burn treatments, then you simply rub warmed alive frog or even an electric eel in oil onto the wound. And of course, you'd chant incantations, calling gods to drive out the illness, because disease was basically demonic. Creepy? Maybe. But back then, this was perfectly normal Egyptian pharmacopoeia. And if that didn't make you sick, Egyptian justice might. Yes, they had prisons back then, but only as holding cells until a punishment was chosen. And some penalties sound medieval, yet they go back thousands of years. You see noses, ears, limbs. They could literally be chopped off. It was all part of the standard legal toolkit. And for the really serious crimes, they didn't stop at disfigurement. Burning or impalement were options. So if you steal something small, you might lose a hand. This is how you literally pay the fine. And usually, theft meant you had to return the item and pay double or triple its worth. However, if you steal from a temple, then that's a whole different level. Think 100 times the value, plus corporal punishment, and maybe death. And if you were a rebel, you risked losing an eye. There's even an old kingdom tomb art that shows prisoners chained to poles, beaten with clubs shaped like fists. And yes, slaves got it just as bad. Some masters would smear them with donkey's milk, lock them in pens and let ants, fleas and flies feast on them. But hey, this was all meant to shock, terrify and remind folks who was in charge. And if you think that was brutal, wait till you hear what they did for the king's funeral. You see, in the early dynastic period, roughly 3100 to 2900 BC, Egyptian pharaohs were buried with people. Real ones. Dozens of them. And sometimes hundreds of his servants, guards, even high-ranking attendants were sacrificed and laid to rest alongside him. They intended to stay that way, forever serving their ruler in the afterlife. Take King Jer. Around 3000 BC, his tomb at Abydos was surrounded by over 300 satellite burials. Some just outside the walls, while others were right up against the main chamber. We're talking full-body sacrifices. Men, women, likely courtiers, even the king's own wives and relatives. Archaeologists found many of these folks were healthy and well-fed, hardly the starving laborers you might expect. And Jer wasn't an exception. You see, King Hor-Aha, the first dynasty's earliest ruler, had around 35 retainers buried with him. Jet had about 170. Den saw roughly 136 to 230, and Kwa, the dynasty's last king, only about 26. Now, all those numbers tell a story. Some skeletons show reddish staining in the dentin of their teeth, which was a classic sign of strangulation. Others show no trauma at all, hinting at poisoning. So yes, tidy. Far less messy than you'd think. But still, horrifying. However, why did Egypt stop? Well, first of all, logistics. If every time a king dies you wipe out your best admins and guards, you're going to run short on talent. And second of all, religious evolution. You see, by the Old Kingdom, they introduced clay servants, or Shabti statues, to do the afterlife work instead. So, there was no need to murder your butler. But in the First Dynasty, the king was a literal god on earth. So, his funeral was essentially his whole household moving to the next world. Meanwhile, the living had a job too: cry loud enough to shake the gods. That's right. Grieving in ancient Egypt was loud. Very loud, in fact. And very, very public. Funerals were full-on performances, with sound effects. And right up front were the mourners, usually women, often local, sometimes hired, but always dramatic. There's this limestone relief from the New Kingdom that shows a group of women throwing sand on their heads, beating their chests, and howling like their lives depended on it. Now, modern scholars sometimes call them professional mourners, but that title might be a bit generous. It's more likely they were just women from the community, showing up to grieve, show support, and let's be honest, probably not missing the chance to be part of the day's big public event. Still, some mourners were hired, and when they went for it, they really went for it. Text and Tumart describe them positioned dramatically at both ends of the funeral bier, screaming, ripping out their hair, launching into full-volume wailing right as the body was laid to rest. Apparently, these were ways to honor the dead, to help guide the soul into the afterlife. In fact, if you didn't hear the mourners wailing in the streets of the necropolis, something was probably wrong. And while grief filled the streets, palace bedrooms were full of secrets best left in the family. You see, there's a surprising truth about ancient Egypt that you probably didn't already know. Marriages and intimate ties between close relatives, like parents and children, happened more often than you'd think, especially among royalty and high-ranking priests. After all, these were no ordinary folk. They carried divine status, which let them break rules common families couldn't. Take the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. They were considered gods walking among people. So, marrying a sibling, or even a mother marrying her son, wasn't scandalous back then. It was more like a strategy to preserve that divine bloodline. Even historians confirm that brother-sister marriages were common among royalty in Egypt. These unions came with privilege and purpose. Tutankhamun, for instance, married his half-sister Ankhesenamun. Amenhotep III even took multiple sisters as queens, like a long-running royal sitcom, minus the laugh track. Again, such marriages were ritually significant. Meanwhile, everyday Egyptians were free to start their families outside their nuclear circles, thankfully. And in the end, yes, life in ancient Egypt had its extremes. By our standards, it's all pretty shocking. But back then, it was part of the package. Real, ritual, and routine.